Thank you for joining us for our monthly webinar series from Local Market Monitor, where we take a closer look at this month's National Economic Outlook, which was written by Local Market Monitor's founder, Ingo Windsor. For those of you that don't know Ingo, he's been analyzing real estate markets for over 30 years and is a graduate of MIT and Boston University. He's not your typical economist and has a knack for taking complex data, extracting what is important, and providing unique insights and tangible guidance on real estate markets. So with that, I bring you Ingo and his insights on the economy.
Thanks very much, Carolyn. Every month, we look at the latest economic data to see what they can tell us about real estate markets, where they are now, and where they may be headed. Our underlying premise is that you make better investment decisions when you have a better idea of the economic forces that affect supply and demand. This month, in addition to looking at the health of the overall economy, we'll look more closely at what's likely to happen in 2025, which is even more difficult than usual because we don't yet know what kind of economic effects will result from the policies of the new administration. What will happen with jobs, because jobs create demand for housing, and what will happen with mortgage rates, because the current high rates have frozen many buyers and sellers out of the market. Let's look first at jobs, our best short-term indicator of how the economy is doing. Here's a picture of the monthly increase in jobs compared to the same month of the previous year. In November, the increase from last year was 1.4%, continuing the trend of the last 2 years towards slower growth. And as I've said before, even this low rate is still partly due to rehiring for jobs that were lost during the pandemic, rather than the creation of new jobs. The economy is actually growing slower than this job picture shows. When I say the economy, I mean that aspect of the economy that's most important for housing. Gross domestic product, another way to measure the economy, increased at a 3% rate in the most recent quarter, which is much better than jobs, but it mainly measures spending, which is not always a measure of economic health, because spending can be funded by going deeper into debt, the situation for a lot of Americans right now. We'll talk more about that some other time, but let's get back to jobs and specifically to the rate of job growth we should expect in 2025. Politicians like to brag about how many jobs their policies have created, but this is one area of the economy where politicians actually have very little influence. The economy is so large and complex that it takes many years for new policies to have any effect. So instead of guessing about future policies, we can look at larger forces, such as the growth of the population, to get an estimate for 2025. Over the last 30 years, the average multiplier from population growth to job growth is about 1.5. In the past year, the U.S. population grew just 0.5%. So we can expect the rate at which jobs are created in 2025 to be only 0.75%. That's half the current rate and not very far from stagnation. This isn't just a math exercise. It confirms the trend we've been on and is supported by the situation in the various sectors of the economy, which we'll look at now. It only accounts for 5% of all jobs, but construction is one sector where jobs are being added at a good rate. It's mainly in non-residential construction, things like schools, data centers, and distribution warehouses. The manufacturing sector is bigger, with 8% of all jobs, but there has been zero growth for more than a year. That's despite 4 years of policy efforts to bring jobs back from overseas. It's almost the same in the small but important finance sector, job growth of just 0.5%. And in the retail sector, which provides 10% of all jobs. Restaurants provide about 8% of all jobs and lost a lot of them during the pandemic. Many of those jobs have returned, but growth will be hampered in the future by changing consumer habits. The big problem with the economy is made clear in the business services sector. This is one of the largest sectors of the economy with 14% of all jobs and provides services that all other businesses need. It's therefore our best measure for actual economic activity. It's been growing at less than 1% for several years and recently very close to zero. Government is the largest sector of the economy with 15% of all jobs and normally adds them at less than 1% a year. But the current rate is over 2%, largely because of a surge of rehiring by state governments since the end of the pandemic, a lot of it at state universities. In the big healthcare sector, 11% of all jobs, growth is nearly 4%, twice the normal rate. But there are two parts to this. On the one hand, there's rehiring at nursing homes, which were hit hard during the pandemic. This will eventually slow to a much lower rate. In other parts of healthcare, however, there is in fact brand new job growth. In home healthcare, for example, jobs are increasing at a 10% annual rate. Overall, we can expect growth in healthcare to slow down to its normal 2% by the end of 2025. So, right now, it's the healthcare and government sectors that are providing growth. It's not a sustainable way to run an economy, and it supports the idea that job growth in 2025 will be less than 1%. What does this mean for home prices? They increased sharply during the pandemic for very special reasons and are now stuck at a level much higher than local incomes. The high prices, especially when coupled with high mortgage rates, mean that most potential home buyers right now can't qualify for a mortgage. With low job growth in 2025, there won't be many new buyers, so prices should come down. But very high prices all by themselves will keep prices high. People who list a home for sale may cut their price by 5 or 10% if they have no takers, but they won't cut the 20 or 30% needed to be affordable to buyers. A lot, therefore, will depend on interest rates. The Federal Reserve jacked up interest rates in 2022 in response to rising inflation, and mortgage rates doubled to 7%. Now that inflation is back to pre-pandemic levels, you'd expect a quick return to lower rates in 2025, but that's not likely to happen. For one thing, the Federal Reserve is always worried about the health of banks, whose income is tied to interest rates, so a slow reduction in rates is much more likely. And it will be worried about some policy proposals of the new administration that could, again, boost inflation. So overall, I expect the mortgage rates will be lower by the end of 2025, but not much, which in turn means more activity in the housing market, but not a lot. And home prices will come down somewhat, but still remain too high. That's it. In this time of uncertainty, it's important for bankers and investors to stay on top of local economic and real estate developments. Local Market Monitor provides the data and analysis they need with local market reports and investors' metro analysis. Thanks very much for following along. This is our National Economic Outlook. I'm Ingo Windsor.